The park hummed with the low murmur of a Houston afternoon. The laughter of children mixed with the distant hiss of traffic and the occasional bark of a dog. Ethan heard none of it. He walked with a quick pace, a man accustomed to motion, to purpose, though today his mind was aimlessly drifting. His polished shoes hit the path rhythmically, the weight of the day hunching his shoulders, and then he saw her. At first, it was a fleeting glimpse, a woman sitting on a worn bench, her head bowed to the ground. Nearby, 2 children played, their laughter sharper, more alive than the others. Ethan slowed, not knowing what had caught his attention, until the woman shifted slightly, and the sunlight illuminated her profile. It couldn't be. His feet froze before his mind reacted. Scarlett. Her name came unbidden, lodging in his throat. A careless knot tied her hair, once so shiny and smooth. Her clothes hung loosely, a worn fabric that told its own story. Yet what struck him most was her posture, a quiet, but undeniable, weariness. She sat with her hands loosely clasped, her shoulders curved inward, as if protecting herself from the world. He approached. Cautiously at first, the crunch of the gravel under his feet betraying his presence. She looked up, startled, her wide eyes fixed on his. "Scarlett," he said, his voice low, testing the name as if it might disappear. Her expression wavered. Recognition. Panic. Something else he couldn't decipher. She straightened, her hands moving instinctively to smooth the fabric of her skirt. "Ethan," she replied, her voice steady but cold. "It's been a while." "A while?" The understatement felt like a punch. 5 years. No word, no explanation. And now, here she was, sitting in a park with 2 children who couldn't be older than 4. "I didn't expect to see you," he managed to say, his gaze shifting to the children. One of them, a bright-eyed boy, with a mess of dark curls, was laughing as he chased a fallen leaf. The other lagged behind, quieter, his small hand clutching the edge of the bench. Scarlett followed his gaze, her lips tightening into a thin line. Life is full of surprises. Her tone conveyed to him the importance of not rushing the conversation. "Can I buy you a coffee?" He gestured to the small cafe visible just beyond the park's fence. Her hesitation was palpable. She looked at the children, then back at him. "I don't think so. It's just coffee," he cut in, his voice softening. "Please." A pause. The pause drew on, making her feel vulnerable. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, but not for long." They walked in silence, the children trailing closely behind. At the cafe, Ethan ordered 2 coffees, while Scarlett settled the children at a corner table with 2 small cups of juice. When she finally sat across from him, she somehow looked smaller, her hands tightly wrapped around the ceramic mug. "How have you been?" he asked, his voice as neutral as he could make it. "Fine," she said quickly, her gaze darting nervously to the children. "We're getting by." Her clipped tone left no room for more detail. Ethan leaned back slightly, watching her. The Scarlett he remembered had been vibrant and self-assured. This Scarlett seemed more like a shadow, her light dimmed, but not extinguished. "The children," he ventured cautiously. "They're mine," she said, her tone sharp, as if daring him to ask for more. "And their father?" He regretted the question the moment it left his lips, her eyes flashing with something. Anger? Hurt? Maybe both. "That's not a conversation I'm ready to have." The air between them grew heavier, and Ethan didn't press. Instead, he changed the subject. "They seem like lovely children, full of energy." Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "They are. Leo's the loud one. Leo is insatiably curious and always on the move. David is quieter, more thoughtful." Ethan nodded, filing away the names and the small details she offered. He glanced at the clock on the wall. Time was slipping away, and he was no closer to understanding why she had disappeared, or why she seemed so determined to keep the truth locked away. When they were done, he stood. "Let me walk you home." "You don't have to," she said. But there was no conviction in her words. "I want to." The walk to her apartment was silent, broken only by the children's chatter. When they reached the building, Ethan felt a cold knot in his stomach. The structure was crumbling at the edges, its paint faded and peeling. A narrow staircase led up to the second floor. The handrail was rusted. "Scarlett," he began, his voice trailing off as she turned to face him. "I appreciate the coffee, Ethan," she said, her tone firm and final. "Goodbye." He stood there as she climbed the stairs, the sound of her footsteps fading into the distance. The door closed softly behind her, but Ethan remained still, staring at the building as if it were about to give up its mysteries. And then he turned and walked away, a silent resolve taking hold of him. Something had to change. The past revealed. The next morning, the memory of Scarlett's tired eyes clung to Ethan like a shadow over his breakfast. He stirred his coffee absently, the clinking of the spoon against the porcelain echoing in the otherwise silent kitchen. He had barely slept, plagued by questions and the image of her rundown apartment building. By mid-morning, he found himself back at her doorstep, his hand poised to knock. The hallway smelled vaguely of damp plaster, and the muffled sounds of life filtered through the thin walls. After a moment, the door creaked open, and Scarlett appeared, her expression a mix of surprise and defensive resignation. "Ethan," she said, her voice low. "What are you doing here?" "I couldn't leave it," he replied, his tone firm but not unkind. "Can we talk?" She hesitated, her grip on the doorframe tightening. From inside, the sound of sharp, irrepressible giggles spilled into the hallway. Scarlett looked over her shoulder before stepping aside. "Fine, but keep your voice down," she said, opening the door wider. The apartment felt even smaller in the daylight. The furniture was sparse and mismatched, and the walls had yellowed with time. Ethan watched Leo and David playing with a makeshift fort of blankets and chairs, their giggles a harsh contrast to the somber atmosphere. Scarlett crossed her arms as Ethan turned to face her. "What do you want, Ethan?" He hesitated, his gaze going to the children before returning to her. "Are they mine?" Her face tightened, the question hanging in the air between them. She exhaled sharply, a sound more of exhaustion than of frustration. "Yes," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "They're yours." The word hit him hard, making him speechless for a moment. His eyes moved to the children again, Leo with his boundless energy, David quieter, more thoughtful, and the resemblance was impossible to ignore. 5 years, he said, his voice choked. "I've had 5 years of missing their lives. It's been 5 years, Scarlett. Why?" Her jaw tightened, her posture stiffening into a shield. "It's not that simple," she said, her words clipped. "Then make it simple," he replied, his frustration overflowing. "You disappeared, Scarlett. You left. And now I find out about—" He stopped, taking a deep breath. His voice softened. "I deserve to know why." Scarlett's gaze dropped to the floor, her fingers tracing the edge of the counter, as if she were searching for something solid to hold on to. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she said after a long pause. "For them, for you, for me." The disbelief in his voice was unmistakable. "You think this is what I would have wanted? Finding out about my children like this?" Her silence was answer no. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, pacing to the edge of the room and back. "They deserve better than this," he said finally, his voice firm but resolute. "You can't keep living like this, Scarlett. They can't." She raised her head sharply, her eyes narrowing. "What are you suggesting?" "Come live with me," he said, the words leaving no room for discussion. Scarlett blinked, taken aback. It's not negotiable," he cut her off, his tone soft but firm. "They're my children too, and I want them to have a stable home. I want you to have a stable home." Scarlett shook her head, her hands clenching at her sides. "I don't need your charity, Ethan." "This isn't charity," he said, stepping closer. "It's responsibility. It's about giving them a chance to grow up without worrying about leaky roofs and broken heaters." He gestured to the apartment. "This isn't good enough for them, Scarlett. You know it." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she didn't let them fall. She turned away, focusing on the children, who were now watching them with curiosity. "Give me time," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "I need time to think." Ethan nodded, though his jaw was tight. "Take all the time you need, but I'm not going anywhere. They're my family too." He turned to leave, stopping at the door. He looked back and said, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry, for whatever made you think you had to do this alone." Scarlett didn't respond, but the look on her face, a mix of determination and vulnerability, stayed with him as he walked away. Outside, the Houston air was thick and humid, clinging to his skin as he headed for his car. His mind raced with plans, with questions. But one thought rose above the chaos. He wasn't going to let them get away again. A new beginning. 3 days passed before Ethan returned. This time, he wouldn't leave without an answer. As he climbed the narrow, creaking staircase to Scarlett's apartment, his determination hardened. He knocked twice, the sound echoing down the dark hallway. The door opened just enough to show Scarlett's face. "Ethan," she said with a sigh, her voice laced with resignation and fatigue. "You don't give up, do you?" "Not when it comes to this," he replied, his tone firm. "I'm serious, Scarlett. The children, Leo and David, deserve better. You deserve better." Her grip on the door tightened. For a moment it seemed as though she would refuse again, but then she looked over her shoulder at the cluttered apartment, the cracked walls, and the 2 little ones sitting on the floor with their makeshift toys. "Give me a minute," she mumbled. When she reopened it, Leo and David were at her side, each clutching a small, hastily packed bag. Scarlett stood behind them, her expression unreadable. "We'll try it," she said, her voice lower now. "But only for the children. Don't think this changes anything between us." Ethan knelt down to the children's height. "Hi," he said, smiling gently. "You guys are going to come stay with me for a while. Is that okay?" Leo nodded enthusiastically, his large eyes shining. David, ever the quieter one, clung to his mother's leg, but he nodded with a small, hesitant smile. The ride to Ethan's apartment was uneventful, broken only by Leo's excited chatter and David's cautious silence. When they arrived, Ethan opened the door to his spacious, minimalist apartment, its polished surfaces and sleek furniture, a stark contrast to Scarlett's narrow, run-down space. Leo bounded inside, his face lighting up as he explored the living room. "It's so big!" he exclaimed, spinning around in the open space. David lagged behind, his small hand clutching Scarlett's. His eyes scanned the unfamiliar surroundings, his grip tightening. Scarlett walked in slowly, her gaze sweeping the apartment. The high ceilings, the pristine walls, and the modern decor made her feel as though she didn't belong. She set the children's bags down near the sofa, keeping her arms crossed as if to shield herself. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, voice low. "Yes, I did," Ethan replied, his tone even. "It's what they deserve." Ethan found himself torn between fascination and frustration as the hours wore on. Leo adapted quickly, asking endless questions about the apartment and about Ethan himself. "What's this for?" Leo asked, pointing to a sleek coffee maker on the counter. Ethan chuckled. "That's for making coffee. Do you want to see how it works?" Leo nodded eagerly, and Ethan showed him how to push the buttons, explaining each step. David watched from the edge of the kitchen, his arms wrapped around his small body. Meanwhile, Scarlett stayed in the background, observing. She watched Ethan's attempts to connect with both children, but David responded to his efforts with a cautious hesitation. Still, he didn't give up, kneeling to David's level when he spoke to him, or offering him small gestures of encouragement. "He's shy," she said softly, with a touch of apology in her voice. Ethan looked at her. "He's cautious," he corrected gently. "That's not a negative thing." That night, Scarlett stood by the window, gazing out at the city skyline, after Ethan had hastily furnished the children's guest room. The silence of the apartment felt almost oppressive, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. "You're quiet," Ethan said, entering the room. Scarlett turned, her arms still crossed. "This feels temporary," she said simply, "as if it's not real." "It's real," Ethan said, his voice firm yet kind. "And it doesn't have to be temporary." She didn't reply, her gaze returning to the window. Later that night, while tidying up the living room, Ethan found something tucked behind a stack of old books on a bookshelf. He pulled it out, a small framed photo. His breath caught as he looked at it. It was Scarlett. The photo was from years ago, from when their world had been simpler, from when they had believed that nothing could ever break them. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her eyes bright with joy. He sank onto the sofa, the photo still in his hand. Memories flooded him, of laughter, of promises whispered in the dark, of a future they had once envisioned together. And then, as suddenly as before, the pain of her absence resurfaced, sharp and unrelenting. Ethan sat there for a long time, the photo resting in his lap, as the questions he had long buried came rushing back. Facing the truth, Scarlett stood in this doorway of the children's room, watching as Leo animatedly showed Ethan a drawing he had made that day. Ethan was kneeling by the bed, his tie loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled up. An image of relaxed concentration. David sat close by, quieter, but his small hand rested lightly on Ethan's knee. It was a gesture of silent trust, one that made Scarlett's chest clench. She had seen this scene in her mind countless times over the years, but now as she witnessed it, the reality felt sharper, more complicated. Relief mixed with anxiety, scratching at the edges of her resolve. She turned away, retreating to the quiet of the living room. The hum of the city outside offered little comfort. Scarlett sank onto the sofa, her fingers tracing the hem of her sleeve as memories began to stir, unbidden and unwelcome. It was the photo from the hotel that had shattered everything. The image had arrived in her inbox with a cruel precision. Ethan, with his arm around Emily, leading her into a room. Emily's head bowed into him, their proximity intimate, undeniable. Scarlett had been unable to breathe. She had stared at the screen, the edges of her vision blurring as her world came crashing down. Her mind had betrayed her, replaying every word of love Ethan had told her, now filled with doubt. She remembered the excuses, late meetings, business trips. She had believed him, had trusted him, and yet there was the proof. Cold, hard, inescapable. She clenched her hands tightly, the phantom pain of that moment still in her chest. She had left not out of anger, but out of desperation. Staying had felt impossible. Facing him, pretending nothing had changed, had felt like a lie too heavy to carry. But now, as she glanced toward the children's room, she wondered if her choice had been a mistake. "Scarlett," Ethan's voice broke through her thoughts. She looked up to see him standing in the doorway. He was no longer wearing his tie, and his expression was serious. She straightened, masking her torment. "What is it?" He walked into the room, a steady gaze on her, but filled with frustration. "I can't help but notice. You've kept your distance. You're here, but it's as if you're hiding something. I can see it. The children can feel it too." Her defenses went up instantly. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." His tone was firm, but not unkind. "This isn't just about the children. It's about us. Whatever happened 5 years ago, it didn't just affect you. I lost something too." Scarlett stood, crossing her arms instinctively, This isn't the time, Ethan. When is the time, Scarlett? When are you going to let me in? The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truths. She turned away, her gaze fixed on the dark city skyline. You don't want to know, she said quietly, her voice trembling despite her effort to keep it steady. Yes, I do, he insisted. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. I deserve to know why you left. I deserve to know why you didn't trust me enough to stay. She held her breath, the words cutting her deeper than he could know. She fought the urge to lash out, to deflect with anger. Instead, she swallowed hard and spoke carefully. I left because it was the only thing I could do. For me, for the children, for you. For me? He repeated, disbelieving. How is leaving me in the dark, missing out on my children's lives, for me? Scarlett's grip on her emotions faltered. I believed you had moved on, Ethan, she said, her voice cracking. I thought there was someone else. The confession silenced him, his brows furrowing in confusion. What are you talking about? She shook her head, refusing to give more details. It doesn't matter anymore. Yes, it does, he said firmly. If you thought I had moved on, why didn't you confront me? Why didn't you ask me the truth? Her silence was her only answer. Ethan exhaled sharply, his frustration evident. Fine, he said at last. If you're not ready to tell me, I won't press you. But I'm not going to let this go, Scarlett. Not until I understand what happened. She watched him walk out of the room, her heart beating painfully in her chest. The betrayal truth. Later that night, Scarlett found herself standing in the hallway, her hand resting on the doorframe of the children's room. Ethan was in there again, his voice low as he read from a storybook. Leo was sprawled on the bed, his head propped on his hands, while David leaned against Ethan, his eyes half closed. Scarlett's breath caught at the sight. Ethan's face was soft as he read, his concentration entirely on the children. It was a side of him she hadn't allowed herself to think about, a piece of the man she had loved so deeply and had tried so hard to forget. But watching him now, she felt something shift, a crack in the armor she had so carefully built. She couldn't deny it. A part of her wanted to believe again. She retreated into the shadows, unseen, her emotions a silent storm. The morning sun bathed Ethan's sleek car in light as he glided up the long driveway to Eleanor's estate. The towering iron gate swung open smoothly, revealing manicured lawns and a mansion that screamed wealth and control. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw set with a determination that hadn't wavered since the night before. The memories of Scarlett's words haunted him. I believed you had moved on. Her voice, shaky and raw, had left him with more questions than answers. There was only one person who could possibly have the missing piece of the puzzle, someone who had never supported his relationship with Scarlett. His mother, Eleanor. Ethan parked in front of the grand entrance, his polished shoes echoing on the stone steps as he walked up. The heavy oak door swung open before he could knock, and a smartly dressed butler greeted him with a slight bow. Mr. Carter, your mother is expecting you in the sitting room. Ethan nodded, stepping inside the house. The air inside was cool and smelled vaguely of fresh flowers, but there was an unshakable chill, as if familial warmth had been left out of the architectural plans. Eleanor was seated, poised, on a cream-colored sofa, her posture as regal as her pearls. She looked up as Ethan entered, her smile thin and controlled. Ethan, dear, this is an unexpected visit. Will you have coffee? No, thank you, he said flatly, standing near the edge of the room as if proximity alone could burn him. She raised an eyebrow. Straight to the point, then. Did you know Scarlett thought I was with someone else? He asked, skipping the pleasantries. Eleanor blinked, her serene expression faltering just a bit. I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't you? Ethan stepped closer, his voice strained. She left because she thought I was with Emily. She saw a photo of us going into a hotel together, a photo I didn't even know existed. Eleanor's fingers tightened around her teacup before she set it down with a deliberate motion. "And what makes you think I have anything to do with this supposed misunderstanding?" Ethan's gaze pierced her. "Because you never wanted me to be with Scarlett. Because you thought she wasn't good enough for me." Eleanor's smile vanished completely, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "Ethan, you're being ridiculous. I wanted what was best for you, as any mother would." "What's best for me?" he repeated bitterly. "You think it was best for me to lose 5 years of my children's lives? For Scarlett to think I betrayed her?" She stood up slowly, her polished composure cracking just enough to reveal the steel beneath. "Scarlett was never right for you," she said sharply. "She would have held you back. Everything you've accomplished, everything you've built. Do you think that would have been possible with her in the picture?" Ethan's fists clenched at his sides. "This isn't about my career, Mother. It's about the woman I loved, the mother of my children. You had no right." Eleanor's mouth opened as if to argue, but her words faltered. She turned to the window, the sunlight casting long shadows across the room. "You don't understand what it's like to watch your son make a mistake," she said in a low voice. "Scarlett wasn't a mistake," he said firmly. Eleanor looked back at him for joy, her eyes cold. "Arthur and I, we just wanted to protect you. Emily was hired to test her resolve. Yes, but the photo, it was meant to open her eyes to the reality that she didn't belong in your world." Ethan took a step back, as if the revelation had physically struck him. "Are you telling me you set it all up? That you and Arthur orchestrated this?" Eleanor's silence was answer enough. "I trusted you," he said, his voice breaking. "You took everything from me. And for what? For a twisted idea of what my life should be like?" Eleanor's gaze hardened. "Scarlett will only bring you trouble, Ethan. She already has. You've spent years trying to build something of value, and now you're willing to throw it all away for—" "Enough!" Ethan cut her off, his voice like a whip. "You don't get to decide what has value in my life. You don't get to decide who I love." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't argue. Ethan turned toward the door, his steps deliberate. Reaching the doorway, her voice stopped him. "If you think this changes anything, you're wrong. Scarlett will never fit into this family. She will ruin you, Ethan." He did not turn back. "You already did, Mother." The door closed behind him with a final quietness, leaving Eleanor alone in the cavernous room. Outside, the air felt heavier than before. Ethan sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel, his thoughts a chaotic storm. His mother's words echoed in his ears, but they only strengthened his resolve. Whatever his family had destroyed, he would rebuild. He owed that to Scarlett and their children. The confession. The sun hung low in the Houston sky as Ethan parked his car in front of the apartment. His conversation with Eleanor still churned in his mind, a volatile mix of rage and regret. He got out, bracing himself for what was to come. Scarlett deserved the truth, however difficult it was to share. Inside, the apartment was quiet, except for the occasional murmurs of the children playing in their room. Scarlett was sitting at the dining table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She looked up as he entered, her expression defensive. "You're back," she said simply, her tone revealing nothing. Ethan nodded, taking off his coat and hanging it over a chair. "We need to talk." Her grip on the mug tightened, but she didn't move. "I'm listening." He sat across from her, leaning forward, his elbows on the table. "I went to see my mother today. I needed answers, and now I have them." Scarlett's eyes narrowed slightly, her suspicion evident. "And—" Ethan took a deep breath, his shoulders tense. "The photo you saw, the one that made you leave, it was staged. My mother and Arthur orchestrated the whole thing. They hired Emily, set up the situation, and made sure you saw it." Scarlett's fingers went slack, and the mug trembled slightly against the table. She stared at him, her expression a mix of disbelief and pain. "You're saying the whole thing was a setup?" Ethan nodded. "I didn't know at the time, That day, Emily said she wasn't feeling well. We were at the hotel for a business meeting, and I helped her get a room to rest. That was it. Nothing happened. I had no idea a photo existed. I didn't know they used it to drive you away. His voice cracked a little, the weight of the confession pressing on him. Scarlett leaned back, crossing her arms over her chest like a shield. Her breathing was ragged as she processed his words. "So, you're telling me," she said slowly, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and anguish, "that for 5 years, everything I believed was a lie. That I tore our lives apart over a fabrication." Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes filled with regret. "Yes, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Scarlett. You didn't deserve that. Neither of us did." She stood up abruptly, walking to the window, her hands in her hair. "I don't even know how to feel right now," she said, her voice breaking. "It's been 5 years, Ethan. 5 years I spent believing you betrayed me. 5 years raising our children alone." He got up too, keeping his distance. "I know. I can never give you those years back, but I want to make things right. I want to make things right for you, for Leo, and for David. If you'll let me." Her shoulders slumped slightly, the rage subsiding and giving way to exhaustion. "This doesn't erase everything, Ethan. The hurt, the distrust, it doesn't go away overnight." "I don't expect it to," he said softly. "But I'm not going anywhere, Scarlett. Not again." She turned to face him, her eyes searching his for something. Truth. Certainty. Maybe both. Redemption. The next few days passed in an awkward truce. Scarlett remained guarded, but the walls she had built were no longer impenetrable. Ethan focused on the children, his efforts genuine and tireless. He read to them, played with them, and answered their endless questions with a patience Scarlett hadn't expected. Ever energetic, Leo quickly warmed up to Ethan, pulling him into his world of curiosity and imagination. David, slower to trust, began to follow suit. One afternoon, Scarlett watched as Ethan taught David how to tie his shoes. "Just like that," Ethan said, his voice soft but firm. "Loop the lace. Pull. There you go." David looked up, a shy smile spreading across his face. "Thanks, Dad." The word hit Ethan hard, his throat tightening, but he managed to smile back. "Any time, buddy." Scarlett watched from the doorway, her hand pressed against the frame. The scene moved her, something fragile, yet undeniable. On Saturday, Ethan proposed a family outing. "There's a park not far from here," he suggested. "The children can run around for a while, and we can get out of the house." Scarlett hesitated, but the children's enthusiasm tipped the scales. The day was bright and clear, the park filled with families. Leo and David ran across the grass, their laughter infectious. For a moment, Scarlett allowed herself to relax, sitting on a bench next to Ethan. "You're so good with them," she said in a low voice, surprising herself. Ethan turned to her, his expression warm. "They make it easy." Before she could reply, a sharp cry cut through the air. Scarlett's heart sank as she saw Leo collapse on the grass. "Leo!" "Oh!" she cried, running to him. Ethan was already there, scooping the boy into his arms. "Call an ambulance," he said, his voice tight with panic. Scarlett fumbled for her phone, her hands trembling as she dialed. As the ambulance arrived, the world became a cacophony of sirens and frantic movements. Scarlett clung to David, who was sobbing, as Ethan climbed into the ambulance with Leo. Her heart hammered as she watched the vehicle drive away, Ethan's pale face visible through the back window. Standing in the empty park, Scarlett hugged David tightly, the weight of the moment crushing her. Her mind raced with questions and fears, but one thought shone brighter than the rest. They couldn't lose Leo. A family united. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear. Fluorescent lights illuminated every corner, revealing sterile walls, and the quiet bustle of nurses and doctors moving with a trained urgency. Scarlett sat on the edge of a hard plastic chair, hugging David tightly against her chest. Ethan paced the waiting room, his face pale, his tie askew. Every now and then, his gaze would dart toward the double doors where Leo had disappeared, carried away on a stretcher. The boy's face, so pale and still, haunted him. A nurse came in, a clipboard tucked under her arm. "Mr. Carter!" Ethan turned sharply, his heart in his throat. "How is he?" "He's stable for now," the nurse said, her voice calm but serious. "The doctors are running tests to determine the cause of his collapse. We'll let you know as soon as we have more information." Scarlett's voice broke the tension. "Can we see him?" The nurse hesitated. "He's in the pediatric area, only one parent at a time for now." Ethan looked at Scarlett, his expression torn. She nodded, understanding his unspoken request. "Go," she said softly. He disappeared through the doors without a word, leaving Scarlett and David alone in the suffocating silence. In the ward, Leo lay in a small hospital bed, an IV drip in his arm. Machines beeped constantly beside him, their rhythm the only certainty that life still clung to him. Ethan sank into the chair next to the bed, his head in his hands. "I'm here, buddy," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." An hour later, a doctor called Ethan and Scarlett into a small consultation room. The tension in the air was palpable as they sat across from the young man in the white coat, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Carter, Mrs. Lane," the doctor began, lacing his hands together on the desk. "Leo's tests show he has aplastic anemia. It's a condition where the bone marrow doesn't produce enough blood cells." Scarlett's breath caught, her fingers tightening on the armrest of the chair. "What does that mean? Can he recover?" The doctor's gaze softened. "The condition is life-threatening if untreated, but there are options. He'll need a bone marrow transplant to survive." Ethan leaned forward, his voice strained. "What do we do? Test us. We'll do whatever it takes." The doctor nodded. "We'll test both of you to see if you're a match. If neither of you are, we'll search for a donor. Time is critical, so we'll have to act quickly." The next day, the results came back. Neither Ethan nor Scarlett was a match. The news hit them like a punch, the air in the room seeming to thin. "We'll search the donor registry," the doctor assured them. "But finding a match can take time, and Leo doesn't have much." Ethan felt the walls closing in on him. He racked his brain for options, his mind stopping on a name he had been avoiding for days. Arthur. Later that night, Ethan stood in the dimly lit hallway outside Leo's room. Scarlett was inside, reading softly to the boy, her voice shaky but steady. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the contact he hadn't dialed in days. Finally, he pressed it. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Ethan, this is unexpected." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Arthur, I don't have time for this. I need your help." There was a pause. "Help from me? How ironic." "It's not from me," Ethan said, his voice a little broken. "It's for Leo, my son. He needs a bone marrow transplant, and neither Scarlett nor I are a match. You're the closest family we have left." Arthur's silence was deafening. Ethan could almost hear the older man's hesitation, the weight of old hurts and guilt. "Where do I have to go?" Arthur said finally, his voice lower now. 2 days later, Arthur arrived at the hospital, his presence as jarring as a ghost from a painful past. Scarlett stiffened when she saw him, her protective instincts flaring, but Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "He's here to help," Ethan said softly. Arthur nodded, his eyes unusually humble. "I'll do whatever it takes." The test results came back the next morning. Ethan and Scarlett waited in tense silence as the doctor walked into the consultation room with a folder in his hand. "You'll be happy to know," the doctor began with a slight smile. "Arthur is a match." Scarlett exhaled sharply, her hands covering her face as relief washed over her. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his chest heaving with a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Arthur, standing quietly in the corner, simply nodded. "Let's get started then." As Arthur was prepped for the donation, Scarlett stood outside the operating room, watching him through the glass. For the first time, she saw not the man who had torn her life apart, but the man who could save her son. The weight of the past hadn't lifted, but in that moment, hope flickered in its place. A forgiveness in the making. Arthur lay in bed, pale and drained, his usual imposing presence diminished. The toll of the bone marrow donation was evident in the deep lines etched on his face and the stiffness of his posture. Yet when Ethan entered, Arthur's eyes opened, sharp and unyielding despite the physical exhaustion. Ethan hesitated near the door, his hands in his pockets, his movements uncertain, a sharp contrast to the confident man he used to be. This was not a conversation he had prepared for, but it was one he could not avoid. "Don't just stand there like a stranger," Arthur said, his voice husky but firm. "Sit down." Ethan pulled a chair to the bedside, the legs scraping softly against the tiled floor. For a moment he said nothing, his gaze fixed on his uncle's weathered features. "How are you feeling?" he asked at last, his voice low. Arthur let out a dry chuckle, the sound more air than laughter. "Like someone hit me with a sledgehammer, but I'll live." Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. "Thank you for doing this." Arthur waved a weak hand, dismissing the gratitude. "It's the least I could do." His voice became softer, tinged with something Ethan couldn't identify. "You shouldn't have had to call me. None of this should have happened." Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "You're right. It shouldn't have happened." His words were clipped, but his tone lacked malice. "But it did, and now here we are." Arthur sighed, his chest rising and falling heavily. "I made mistakes, Ethan. I thought I was protecting you, keeping you focused on what mattered, building your future, your legacy." He turned his head slightly, meeting Ethan's gaze. "Now I see I was wrong." Ethan's fingers tightened around the edge of his chair. "You didn't just make mistakes, Arthur. You destroyed lives. You and my mother decided Scarlett wasn't decent enough, and you drove us apart." His voice broke, the anger transforming into something more raw, something closer to pain. Arthur did not flinch under the weight of Ethan's words. Instead, he nodded, accepting them. "You're right," he said simply. "We did, and it's something I will carry with me for the rest of my life." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. "I hated you," Ethan admitted, his voice a bare whisper. "I hated what you did, how you justified it. But now, seeing you here, doing this for Leo..." He trailed off, shaking his head, as if trying to make sense of the conflicting emotions churning within him. Arthur's lips curved into a weak, tired smile. "Ethan, redemption is not an easy journey. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that it's never too late to try." Ethan's shoulders slumped slightly, the tension giving way. He looked at his hands, his silence becoming more forgiving. "You're doing the right thing," he said finally, his voice firm. "For Leo. For all of us." Arthur's smile widened a bit. "I'm trying." Later that night, Ethan stood in the hallway outside Arthur's room, his head resting against the cool wall. The weight of the day was heavy on him, but for the first time in a long time, it felt manageable, like a burden he could share. Scarlett approached, her footsteps soft against the tiled floor. She stopped beside him, her expression unreadable. "How is he?" "He's tired," Ethan replied, straightening his posture. "But he's okay." Scarlett nodded, her gaze drifting toward the door. She hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. "I want to see him." Ethan raised an eyebrow in slight surprise. "Are you sure?" She looked at him, her eyes steady. "He saved Leo's life. I owe him that." Ethan stepped aside, watching as she pushed the door open and disappeared inside. A family reconciliation. Arthur looked up as Scarlett entered, his expression shifting from surprise to something softer. "Scarlett," he greeted, his voice weak. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." Scarlett closed the door behind her, the click of the latch louder than she intended. "I wasn't sure either," she admitted, moving to the chair Ethan had vacated earlier. A silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Scarlett's fingers tightened around her arms as she searched for a way to begin. "Why did you do it?" she asked finally, her voice lower now. Arthur turned his head to look out at her, his tired eyes clear, holding none of the arrogance she remembered. "I owed it to him," he said simply. "To Leo? To Ethan? To you? And to you." Her brow furrowed, her defenses instinctively going up. "Don't think this erases what you did." "I don't," he responded quickly, a sincerity in his tone. "I'm not looking for forgiveness, Scarlett. I don't deserve it. But I had to do something, anything, to make amends." She looked at him, her arms falling to her sides. "You destroyed my life, Arthur. You and Eleanor. You didn't just take Jackson away, you took his children away. Do you even understand what that means?" Arthur's expression darkened, his guilt etched in the lines of his face. "I understand it better now than I did then," he admitted. "At the time, I thought I was protecting Ethan, protecting the family. But all I did was tear it apart. I see it now. I've seen it every day for the last 5 years." Scarlett's throat ached, her anger mixed with a pang of unexpected compassion. "Why now?" she asked. "Why help now, after everything?" Arthur exhaled heavily, his gaze dropping to his hands. "I witnessed his disintegration, Scarlett. I watched Ethan lose the light he once had. And then I saw Leo, so small and fragile. And I knew I had to help. For them. For you. Even if it changes nothing between us." Her eyes filled with tears, and she blinked rapidly to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. She didn't want to feel compassion for him. She didn't want to see the man underneath the damage he had caused either. "You have caused so much pain," she said, her voice shaking. "You can't just fix it with one beneficial action." "I know," he said softly, "but I had to start somewhere." Scarlett looked at him for a long time, her emotions tumultuous. Finally, she reached out, her hands clasped in front of her. "Thank you," she said in a low voice, "for Leo, for helping him." Arthur's lips curved into the slightest of smiles. "It's the least I could do." Later, Ethan walked into the room, his footsteps hesitant. Arthur looked up at his nephew, his expression unreadable. "Scarlett told me you wanted to see me," Ethan said, stopping near the foot of the bed. Arthur nodded, his face softening slightly. "Sit down," he said. Ethan pulled up a chair, his posture stiff, his arms resting on his knees. The two men sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history pressing heavily between them. "I owe you an apology," Arthur began. His voice firm but low. Ethan's brow furrowed, his jaw tightened. "You think an apology is enough?" "No," Arthur admitted, "but it's all I have." Ethan leaned back, his expression hard. "You destroyed everything, Arthur. You helped my mother tear my family apart. You made Scarlett believe I betrayed her. You made me miss the first 5 years of my children's lives. How do I forgive that?" Arthur's gaze did not waver. "You don't," he said simply. "But I hope you will let me help you move forward. I can't undo what I've done, but I can try to make sure you never have to feel that kind of loss again." Ethan's lips set in a thin line, his gratitude for Arthur's sacrifice clashing with his lingering resentment. Finally, he nodded, though his expression was still defensive. "You've taken the first step. Let's see if you can keep going." Arthur smiled weakly, his exhaustion evident. That's fair. For the first time, Scarlett saw a glimpse of the family they could become, a fragile hope that maybe, even after everything, redemption was possible. The wedding, the hospital corridors bustled quietly with the muffled sounds of life, the steady beeping of monitors, the soft shuffle of nurses, the hum of wheels against the polished floor. Scarlett walked slowly toward the pediatric ward, her thoughts heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. David gripped her hand tightly, his large eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. She was halfway to Leo's room when she stopped abruptly, seeing a familiar figure standing near the nurse's station. Eleanor. The older woman's presence was both imposing and strangely submissive. Her tailored coat was draped neatly over her arm. A bouquet of daisies and a small toy, wrapped in bright paper, rested against her chest. Scarlett froze, unsure whether to retreat or approach. Eleanor turned, her gaze locking with Scarlett's. For a moment, neither spoke, the air between them crackling with unresolved tension. "I didn't think you would still be here," Eleanor said, breaking the silence. Her tone was cool, almost casual, but her eyes betrayed something deeper. "I could say the same about you," Scarlett replied, her voice measured. Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. She looked toward the ward, her expression unreadable. "Arthur called me," she said finally. "He told me everything." Scarlett's stomach clenched. "Did he?" Eleanor nodded, her gaze shifting back to Scarlett. "I suppose he thought I needed to understand the consequences of my actions." "And do you?" Scarlett asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Eleanor winced, a flicker of something, perhaps regret, crossing her face. She stepped closer, holding out the bouquet and the toy. "These are for Leo," she said, her tone softening. "I thought he might like them." Scarlett hesitated before taking the items. The flowers were simple but elegant, their bright petals a sharp contrast to the heaviness of the moment. The toy was a small teddy bear, its cheerful smile almost mocking. "Thank you," Scarlett said, her voice cautious. Eleanor's eyes lingered on her grandson, who clung tightly to Scarlett's leg. For a brief moment, her cold demeanor melted, replaced by something almost maternal. "He's a beautiful boy," Eleanor said in a low voice. Scarlett looked at David, running a hand through his curls. "He is." Eleanor straightened, her mask of composure back in place. "I should go," she said, stepping back. "I didn't come here to intrude. I just wanted to see how he was doing." Before Scarlett could reply, Eleanor turned and began to walk away. Ethan arrived moments later, his face tight with worry. He saw Eleanor disappearing down the hallway and immediately tensed. "What was she doing here?" he demanded, his voice low but intense. "She brought flowers and a toy for Leo," Scarlett replied, watching his reaction carefully. Ethan's jaw tightened. "I don't trust her. She's done enough damage. I won't let her." "Ethan," Scarlett cut in, placing a hand on his arm. "Let her go." His brow furrowed as he turned to her. "You think I should just let her walk in here as if nothing happened? She almost ruined us." Scarlett's gaze softened. Her voice was firm. "She's a mother, Ethan. Everything she did, however misguided, she did because she thought she was protecting you. I don't agree with her choices, but I understand them." Ethan's expression wavered, his anger giving way to a reluctant understanding. "And now you trust her?" "I don't know if I'll ever trust her," Scarlett admitted. "But I see someone who is trying, in her own way, to make amends, and that has to count for something." Ethan exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair. "She has a lot to answer for." "Yes, she does," Scarlett nodded. "But we're not the only ones carrying the weight of the past. Let her carry her own. We have enough of our own." The bouquet of flowers was in a small vase on Leo's bedside table, their bright petals lending a touch of color to the sterile room. The teddy bear rested on Leo's pillow, a small smile on his pale face as he slept. Scarlett stood at the foot of the bed, watching him breathe, her hand brushing David's curls. Ethan was at her side, his arm lightly touching hers. In that moment, the weight of Eleanor's actions felt distant, eclipsed by the fragile hope of Leo's recovery and the quiet resilience of their family. Later that night, as Scarlett sat alone at Leo's bedside, the hospital quiet around her, she found herself replaying Eleanor's words in her mind. The past was not something she could forget, but perhaps, for the sake of her children, she could learn to move forward. The days following Leo's surgery passed in a blur of cautious optimism. His color began to return. The shadows under his eyes faded, and his voice, once weak, became steadier. Scarlett and Ethan divided their time between the hospital and home, slowly settling into a rhythm that, though fragile, held the seeds of something lasting. One afternoon, Scarlett walked into the kitchen and found Ethan sitting at the table with David, carefully putting together a puzzle. The boy's tongue stuck out in concentration as he placed the last piece. "There," Ethan said, his voice warm. "It fit perfectly. Like a team, huh?" David smiled, his shy grin lighting up his face. Scarlett stopped in the doorway, the quiet domesticity of the scene stirring something deep inside her. "You're so good with him," she said quietly, moving into the room. Ethan looked up, a small smile on his lips. "He makes it easy." Scarlett didn't reply, but her chest felt tight at the sight of them. It wasn't just Ethan's attention to the children that moved her. It was the patience, the care, and the unwavering determination to be present. Over time, small moments accumulated, forming the foundation of something Scarlett had believed was lost. During shared meals, Ethan would ask about the children's favorite games and help David with his eating habits. During bedtime stories, Leo would insist that Ethan do all the voices. Ethan would sit across from Scarlett during quiet late-night conversations, freely sharing his thoughts without being demanding. One night, after the children were in bed, Scarlett found Ethan standing on the balcony, a glass of water in his hand. The city lights shimmered around him, bathing his face in a soft glow. She joined him, leaning against the railing. "You've been different," she said. Her voice barely audible. He turned to her, his brow slightly furrowed. "Different." She nodded. "Your drive was unyielding. You were always focused on your work. But you seem to have discovered a way to slow down." Ethan chuckled softly, setting down his glass. "I had to lose everything to realize what mattered most. What mattered most, Scarlett, was never the work. It was always you and them." Her heart ached, the sincerity in his voice cutting through the layers of doubt she had built around her. "I'm trying to trust again," she admitted, her voice trembling a little. "It's not easy." "I know," he said, "and I don't expect it to be. But I'll be here, for as long as it takes." A week later, as Leo's recovery continued, Ethan surprised Scarlett during one of their quiet moments. "I've been thinking," he said, his tone light but his eyes serious. "About what?" she asked, tilting her head. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box. Scarlett's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a simple, elegant ring. "I don't want to waste any more time," he said. "I want us to be a family again, officially. I know it's soon, and I know we still have a lot to work through. But I love you, Scarlett. I've always loved you, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you." Scarlett stared at the ring, her emotions at war. It was everything she had once dreamed of, but the weight of the past still lingered. "Ethan," she began, her voice firm but soft. "This means more to me than I can say, but I need time. I need time to make sure I'm ready, to make sure we're ready." His shoulders relaxed slightly, and he nodded, his smile understanding. "Take all the time you need. The offer will always be here." A few days later, a package arrived at the apartment. Ethan opened it and found a carefully wrapped box and a letter addressed to him. Scarlett joined him as he unfolded the paper, Arthur's familiar handwriting filling the page. "Ethan, by the time you read this, I'll be on my way to New York. My daughter has invited me to stay with her, and I believe it's time to leave Houston behind. Helping Leo reminded me of what truly matters. And while I can't undo the damage I've done, I hope I've taken one small step toward mending what was broken. I wish you, Scarlett, and the children all the happiness in the world. You deserve it, Arthur." Inside the box were a set of handmade wooden blocks, intricately carved and painted. Ethan turned them over in his hands, his expression unreadable. Scarlett placed a hand on his arm. "It's his way of saying goodbye, and maybe it's his way of starting over," he said softly. Ethan nodded, his grip tightening around the blocks. As Scarlett watched Ethan carefully place the blocks on the shelf in the children's room, she felt a shift within herself, a tentative but undeniable hope. Perhaps, she thought, they really could rebuild. The end. A setting sun bathed the garden in golden tones, its warm light casting long shadows over the rows of neatly arranged chairs. White flowers lined the edges of the aisle, their soft petals fluttering with the breeze. The air was filled with the low murmur of close friends and the occasional giggles of the children, who stood near Ethan, each dressed in a smart suit. Leo and David held small velvet boxes in their hands, their excitement barely contained. Leo whispered something to his brother, and David nodded solemnly, gripping his box tighter. Ethan stood at the end of the aisle, his suit impeccable and his tie slightly askew, a small sign of his nervousness. His eyes, however, were steady, focused on the other end of the path where Scarlett would appear. Scarlett took a deep breath, standing just out of sight. The soft fabric of her dress brushed against her legs, and she held a small bouquet of lavender and white roses. Her heart quickened, not from fear, but from anticipation. A delicate and awe-inspiring mix of emotions that coursed through her body with every passing second. When the music began, she stepped forward, the soft notes guiding her down the aisle. She looked up, and there he was, Ethan. He was the man who had shattered her heart, and now was helping to rebuild it. Their eyes met, and in them she saw the unwavering love and determination that had led them to this moment. With every step, the weight of their shared journey pressed softly against her chest, the scars of the past mixing with the hope of the future. The children stood beside Ethan, their faces lighting up as she approached. When she reached the end, Ethan held out his hand. She hesitated for a moment before placing hers in his, the warmth of his touch reassuring her. "You're stunning," he whispered, his voice just loud enough for her to hear. A small smile touched her lips. "You don't look so bad yourself." The officiant began to speak, but Scarlett's focus was entirely on Ethan. The vows they exchanged were simple yet powerful, each word a testament to the journey they had endured. "I promise to never again take what we have for granted," Ethan said, his voice steady, but moved. "To honor the strength it took for you to trust me again, and to be the man you and the children deserve." Tears glistened in Scarlett's eyes as she replied, her voice trembling, yet resolute. "I promise to let go of the fear that kept us apart. I promise to build with you a life that may not be perfect, but will be uniquely ours. I want to, once again, be the partner you have shown me I can be." The world seemed to stop as they slipped the rings onto each other's fingers, the small bands of gold shining in the fading light. The ceremony ended with laughter as Leo and David proudly brought their parents the rings, each boy determined to present his box first. Ethan knelt, hugging them both tightly. "We did it, guys," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We're officially a team." Scarlett knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around the group. It was a messy, beautiful hug, and for a moment, nothing else mattered. From a distance, Eleanor watched the scene. She stood near the edge of the garden, her figure silhouetted against the glow of the setting sun. Her expression was unreadable, her hands tightly clasped in front of her. She didn't approach, didn't say a word, but as the new family laughed and hugged, something in her posture softened. The celebration was small, but warm, filled with clinking glasses, shared stories, and the sound of Leo and David chasing each other around the garden. Scarlett found herself laughing freely, her hand often finding Ethan's as they navigated the evening together. As the night drew to a close, Ethan and Scarlett stood at the edge of the garden, watching the children chase fireflies under the twinkling lights hung in the trees. "Did you ever think we would get here?" she asked, leaning into him. Ethan slipped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "Not for a while," he admitted, "but I knew I would fight for it. For us." She tilted her head, her eyes shining. "And now," he said, his voice soft but certain, "I know this is where we were always meant to be." Scarlett rested her head on his shoulder, her gaze shifting to their children. The children's laughter filled the air, mixing seamlessly with the soft murmur of the night. Eleanor stood near the gate as the guests began to leave, her silhouette barely visible in the dim light. She turned without a word, her head held high, but her steps were slow and deliberate. In the garden, Ethan pulled Scarlett into a gentle embrace, their children joining in as they all tumbled onto the lawn in a tangle of laughter and love. The scars of the past would always remain, but in that moment, they were simply a family, whole and unbroken. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you have any other stories you'd like me to translate or write, please don't hesitate to ask.